Hi, my name is Jehan Agrama, and I'm media co-chair for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. I'm guest hosting today, sitting in for Sheila James Kuehl, and you're watching Get Used to It. Today we're going to be talking about gays and lesbians, their portrayals and coverage in the media, and I'm very happy to have such a wonderful panel. Today we have Dwyer, who is a writer and development director for Norman Lear's Act 3 Productions. Welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We have David Ehrenstein, who is a film critic and historian and freelance writer. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for asking me.
And Bettina Boxall, who is a Metro reporter for the Los Angeles Times and who covers lesbian and gay issues for the Times. Thanks for being here, Bettina.
My pleasure.
In talking about the media, we've really seen an explosion in the last 5 years of gay and lesbian issues and coverage. And we wanted to talk a little today about how this came about and whether or not you think this explosion is taking place and how long it will be lasting. In print, for example, Bettina, what have you seen in the last 5 years at the Times or at other papers?
Well, certainly I would agree that there has been an explosion. The number of stories and the variety of stories has greatly increased. And I think it follows a natural progression. I mean, you have a movement that has been around for a very long time and has been pushing, and eventually a critical mass is reached when the knocking on the door is heard and the door opens somewhat and issues become more in the public eye. AIDS obviously had a great deal in bringing many of these things into the public eye. More gay people are open about being gay, are willing to press their claims, are willing to tell their stories. Pressure from groups such as Glaad has been exerted for a number of years, and more people within the media industry who are gay are willing to be open about that and are willing to make pressures from within that things be covered and that they not be ignored. And it then becomes a snowballing effect. You know, somebody covers something, somebody else covers something. I mean, when you have major news organizations that they basically give the subject legitimacy as a news story, and then other
people pick up on that and are able to continue it.
Right.
You talked about being on the inside and that's helped things. Sean, you're an openly gay man working in Hollywood and the television industry. And how is that working from within? Have you found that, how have the changes occurred in TV from your point of view, and have you felt something on the inside?
Well, definitely. As far as television goes, what you've seen is sitcoms is mostly what I deal with, and that has evolved from gays being portrayed almost as a stereotypical, as the butt of the joke, almost exclusively up until the last few years. There's never really been a major regular cast member on a sitcom or dramatic show that was gay that didn't have a sweater tied around his neck or swishing into the room for the big joke. And what you're seeing now is characters like the one on Melrose Place, and also Sandra Bernhard on Roseanne, who are non-stereotypical gays, which is very interesting to see. And
why do you think we're in comedies so much?
you know, it's funny because...
And not as much in dramas, for example.
It's the way things work almost. It's a society thing. I think it's easier to put across a message with a joke than it is in a more real, dramatic setting. And that's where barriers have been broken in television. It starts with blacks in the early 70s, when they first had their first batch of sitcoms. That was the way that they were able to get into the living rooms of America. And then women, again, in like the 80s, more prevalent as leads of shows or as women running a household. That was the way they were able to break into that barrier. They were able to get there through comedy, because it's more palatable for America to accept that. And that's what you're seeing now. And with, like, especially with Roseanne, with the Sandra Bernhard character, you're seeing someone who is not your stereotypical gay person. And what they did, they introduced her.
I think she's even a bisexual.
She is,
in that.
well, you know, she kind of flips and flops, but that's you know, that's a person's prerogative. That's what's interesting about it. She's not like a martyr. She's not. She's a regular person. She may switch her ideas about where she is, but a lot of people do. And that's what makes her interesting, and that's what makes her not like her predecessors.
Well, we've seen a lot of things happening in television, even more so than film. And David, I wanted to ask you, why is it that TV has more, albeit not that many, gay and lesbian characters, as opposed to theatrical films?
Well, I've been sort of asking myself that question a lot lately. It seems that every time something is done in film, it's a big deal. It's much more monumental, and because films tend to deal with, because gay and lesbian issues are political issues in the world, they are dealt with in this way in film, or perceived in this way in film. Unlike television, where I agree that there's been tremendous amount of work in the fact that gay and lesbian characters have been integrated into situation comedy settings where they're not the butt of the joke. In film, though, then you have to talk about, well, what films do you mean? When you go into discussing film, you're going into the arts in general. And Hollywood film is one thing, independent film is another. There's been a tremendous burst of energy and interest and work being done in the independent arena. And you have out gay and lesbian filmmakers and performers who've been able to make tremendous strides. I think part of this is a generational thing, where the people who are doing the most important work now are young and have always been out, which is just a wonderful thing to think about, of people who it never occurred to them to be in the closet about their sexuality. And the work that's coming along now, some of the most interesting work, which I feel is an independent film, reflects this. And we're getting to see a lot of diversity within independent film in terms of short films, features, documentaries of all kinds that deal with the realities that we face as gays and lesbians from any number of different angles.
But do you think that the impact of films, independent films, is the same as Hollywood? I mean, because I guess when we talk about the fact that we don't see characters, a lot of the time we're talking about the Hollywood picture, the studio picture.
Right. Well, I think that there's a great deal of unfairness involved in it towards independent filmmaking when so much emphasis is being given to the power of Hollywood. Now, Hollywood does have a lot of power in the sense that the films are expensive, they're made with big stars, and that they can get into huge numbers of theaters at one time. And there are huge publicity campaigns attached to Hollywood films, so that you can turn on the TV at any given moment and you'll have star X promoting this or that or the other film. That's all well and good as a demonstration of a certain kind of omnipotence. But we can't rule out the effect that independent films have had with people on an individual level who've discovered them for themselves. And also with television showings of certain kinds of films, certain documentaries. I think that we can't really underestimate the impact that the screening of television shows on public television, like Silver Lake Life, The View from Here, which was an incredibly brilliant documentary on living with AIDS, and most recently on PBS with Tales of the City, has on audiences that see them, but there's nobody out there charting and calling people up and getting, if one or two people are really moved by something, or really, their eyes are really opened to things that they haven't experienced before, or from the standpoint of gays and lesbians who are looking out there for images of themselves in the world and are tuning into these shows or seeking out independent films when they go to various festivals and what have you. That's terribly, terribly important, and we can't let the power of Hollywood push that out of the way.
But it reminds me of the idea of when you're talking about Hollywood and the scope of it. I mean, I know that we can't discount it, but if you look in the print, for example, in the same area, you talk about all the covers of those mainstream magazines that have lesbians, lipstick lesbians, and even though we're not depicted in the ideal way, you know, I wonder what kind of impact that does have. I mean, in covering a smaller area, for example, Bettina, does that have the impact of these other kinds of covers?
Well, I mean, I was about to make the point that with even with independent films, aside from the audience that you're reaching, if you have a successful independent film, the Hollywood, you know, the big Hollywood producers recognize that. I mean, you've seen it in areas outside of gay issues or gay films. the success of the Merchant Ivory films. All of a sudden, you've had films along that line being picked up by the major Hollywood studios. So success in a small way and in a small market breeds success in a much bigger market that reaches a much bigger audience. I mean, these things don't operate completely independent of each other, and there's very much a ripple effect, I think.
I mean, is there an audience for these films? Gay and lesbian issues? I mean, do we think that, or do we think that they're being made out of the kindness of Hollywood's heart in some cases, out of producers who see some, ripple of an effect?
I really don't think so. I mean, anybody who goes into one of your better gay and lesbian bookstores, and everybody out there should go look for one of your better gay and lesbian bookstores wherever you happen to be. I'm constantly overwhelmed by the tremendous diversity of issues, ideas, personalities that all can come under the heading of gay or lesbian. And there's a tremendous amount of new work is being done with people without artists, rediscovering themselves, rediscovering their community, discovering new ways to look at the world, both from a personal standpoint and just in general, and in dealing with where their lives as gays and lesbians fit in or don't fit in to the overall framework of things. And out of this produces an incredible amount of work, and we only scratch the surface of the kinds of work that is going to continue to be coming out.
Well, I think you're right. I think publishing has taken a leap where the other areas in the medium haven't, and I'm wondering what the hesitancy is.
Well, as far as Hollywood is concerned, I think that they're only going to be run by what the bottom line is. If a film makes a lot of money, they're going to want to do another film in that area, or at least be persuaded to do that. You look at the success of, like, The Crying Game, which was an independent film but made $60 or $70 million in America, and Philadelphia, which looks to be making about $70 million. You're going to see that that is now an audience. Like, there is a crossover audience. People are willing to see those images, and people are willing to go and pay to watch that. And I think that'll help. I mean, it is like a ripple effect. You're going to start with independent film, and if independent films become successful, you're going to start getting a little wave, and if they, then a lower budget Hollywood film will come out, and that'll be a little more wave, and then, you'll start getting it up there. It'll probably start with supporting characters, which it always does, before you ever get to, a major Hollywood film with a lead. Philadelphia is an exception. I think that was built mostly around the AIDS issue, which was so out there, but I think that's what's going to happen.
So, do you think that you all sound very optimistic on what's going on, and but we're still talking about network censoring shows for Lesbian Kiss, for example, with Roseanne, and there seem to be some hurdles that we just can't get over as gays and lesbians, and how we're portrayed. Are there anything that you cannot cover, or is it difficult for you to get things written up in the Times about gay and lesbian issues?
Well, I don't think that it's really any more difficult for me in approaching, gay issues than it would be approaching anything else. The Times is a big, in some ways, rather stodgy institution, and there are certain barriers that you're going to run into regardless of what you're covering. And I'm not really sure that at this point those barriers are any more pronounced, with gays in the gay community than they are with anything else.
Yeah, you had mentioned, I think, that the Los Angeles Times has a guide. What is it called?
Well, it's this, I think you're referring to the Style Book Guide,
yes.
which it's an official manual dictating the usage of words, both technical, grammatical, and words within a social context. And actually, we just had went through a rather interesting period where virtually every columnist in the country was taking pot shots at the development of the guide as being far too PC. It was very broad ranging and covered the descriptions of everything, from people who were disabled to gays, whatever. And actually, the gay terminology wasn't too criticized. There was some displeasure in the outside world with, and also within the Times, with with the recommendation that the term gay or lesbian be used rather than homosexual. there were various comments that, well, why not? It's in the dictionary. I mean, you know, what's the matter with the term homosexual?
Has there been resistance to follow that, the guide?
Well, there was resistance to the recommendation that, you know, that gay or lesbian be used rather than homosexual. And the bottom line is, you know, the word, you know, it's still quite possible to use, you know, the term homosexual, and I use it in my stories. But there was a feeling that it was too PC. But I mean, gays were, you know, by no means it was not by no means the only subject that came under attack. I mean, there was far more criticism at the terminology involving the disabled and you know, some terms involving gender and things like that. So it was by no means the center of the controversy.
You were going to say something, David?
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting that language is always the point of resistance with political movements. When political movements start asserting themselves and start redefining terms, the powers that be have to move back, and they don't want to. And you get things like, you know, why is gay or lesbian being used? Why can't we use homosexual? And making arguments in that area is also a way of making advances. I think sometimes the powers that be don't really know this, don't really sense this at the time. It's almost, you know, in their just in their bones. It's like, oh, we're going to have to look at them differently now. Oh, we're going to have to talk about them differently now.
Well, it becomes an issue of who is defining whom. You know, are people being defined by outsiders, or are people being defined by themselves? And you give a group the power to define themselves, and that is a power. I mean, you know, it's the power of description and a definition, which is very important in a
Well, that's really what we're talking about here throughout this discussion, because the power to define ourselves in a very along a very broad range of subjects and in many different areas and under many different headings and subheadings is tremendously important, and it's something that we have won, are winning in what we're doing. It's terribly important. I mean, in my own lifetime, knowing that there was a period when it was something completely exterior to me that was being defined by someone else, and the point at which people started asking, who set up these definitions? What do they mean? What is this insane notion of what a gay or lesbian person is that is being promulgated as some sort of scientific truth? And why is it have nothing to do with the world that I know? And why is it that I'm not allowed to speak about that? Why is it that my opinion about who I am as a gay or lesbian person is not to be trusted?
Well, doesn't, you know, when you talk about defining, again, an organization like Glaad comes from the outside and tries to define that. That's effective to a point, but then on the inside, if there are people making those definitions, gay and lesbian people saying, this is how we want to be defined, I think that changes, and I think that's the area that we need to possibly be focusing on. I mean, I don't know what you think is the most effective tool in this changing of the definition or taking control of framing who we are.
I think the most effective tool is pushing. You know, just keep on pushing. Like, I know, as a writer, I was working on a pilot last year, and we had a lot of resistance because our second lead was a gay man. And it was someone who was coming to terms with his sexuality, was kind of ambivalent about it, but we were going to introduce him, have America fall in love with him, and then, you know, episode 6, pop out of the closet. That was the thought. And it's, you're talking about definition, and we knew where our character was coming from, and we knew what kind of views he was going to have, but the executives we talked to had no clue as to, they couldn't wrap their heads around it. They couldn't see, well, what's funny about him? That was their question, like, where's the joke? And the joke is, you know, from his character, you know, and you build that in, but they had a lot of trouble really grasping it, and that's because there hasn't been, we were trying to make something new. There hasn't been an example. They look to examples to see, well, how are we supposed to react to this? Let's look in the past how we reacted to it before. And that's where the pushing comes in, where you just, you know, it's all people in power can push, and that's how it's going to happen.
So who's pushing whom? Who should be doing the pushing, and who are we
The pushing should be coming from the creative, from whoever has the power. You know, you say, whenever we've talked about this before, where production companies say, well, we can't have gay and lesbian characters because the network won't let us, and the network says we'll hear about them, but they don't bring them to them.
Right.
And the point is, whoever has the power can push it and could make it happen if they believe in it, and if they strive and they do push it through. I mean, the whole point is that, you know, Hollywood is such a tangent. If you have that power, and that power can come from anywhere, it can come from a network, it can come from a production company, it can come from a star, you know, Roseanne Arnold, and that's where, you know, the power base is very different in every situation, and that's where things will be pushed through.
Well, I think things work together. I mean, you have pushing from the outside, which creates an atmosphere from the inside, you know, on the inside, from which efforts can be made, and a base is created. And an anecdote comes to mind with the Los Angeles Times. That this was years ago, before I came to the Times, where apparently some gay reporters wanted to get together with management and talk about coverage of gay issues, which they thought was, you know, deficient in various ways. And apparently one of the editors responded with a memo, I think, to his superior, saying that he didn't see how such discussion would be fruitful. So, I mean, we've, you know, come a long way at the Los Angeles Times from that. And one of the reasons that we've come that far is because of pressure on the exterior. You can't, you know, they don't work independently of each other. And people on the inside, you know, are part of an institution too. I mean, if you're a rebel advocate, you're not going to have your job very long. I mean, you know, there's a very delicate balance that has to be maintained and has to be recognized in terms of when you speak out about what, and you speak out all the time about everything. Nobody's going to listen to you. You're going to be dismissed as, you know, just this zealot, and you're going to lose your credibility and lose an ear. So it's picking your fights, picking your time.
The Times it actually has a support group for gay and lesbian journalists, and I think, wasn't it the first group to launch the National Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association?
I'm not sure if it was first, but it was certainly instrumental in helping to form the national organization. And, you know, there's been a gay caucus within the Times for probably about 5 or 6 years, and you know, it's really probably one of the, you know, the largest groups at a major paper. It still seems when there are you know, conventions for the Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association, and it's interesting that the LA Times always has the biggest contingent, which I think of the major national you know, papers that are recognized nationally. And I think that's partly a reflection on the, you know, greater conservatism on the East Coast. People at the LA Times obviously feel freer to belong to this organization and to be open about it, and are less leery of it jeopardizing their career. Whereas, I mean, as of a year ago, there was no one from the Washington Post who was a member of that organization, and part of that is because the Washington Post had an editor who was well known to be very, you know, pejorative about gays, and you know, he's no longer there.
So you're certainly not going to join
but when
support group
when
in
you have that
situation.
tradition of knowing that, you know, that your boss is not going to be at all happy if you come out, you know, as gay, well, then you shut up, you know, and keep your job.
And I think another thing that's happened is because gay issues have become so prominent that there's no way that the news organizations can avoid dealing with this. And they're going to be, whether they like it or not, looking to gay and lesbian reporters for information. It's absolutely necessary if anything's going to be said or done, especially when we reach certain crisis points in and around gay and lesbian issues. But I agree, it's very important to choose your moment when you're going to speak out, when you're going to remind people that, you know, listen, you know, we're not in a vacuum here.
Yeah, when you're talking about the coverage, it's shocking in terms of the coverage that we got this March on Washington last year. and previous ones that were completely ignored, not covered at all. And it'll be interesting to see what will happen, or what do you think is going to happen, for example, with the gay games and Stonewall 25 that's coming up.
Well, I don't...
Are the papers planning to...
Yeah, I'm not sure that you'll get quite the same coverage that you got with the Washington March. Partly, I think, even though it's Stonewall, I mean, in conjunction with the gay games, I don't think it's quite seen as so political. And there was so much coverage of the Washington March that you may see, you know, a little bit of pulling back, as if, well, you know, are we really going to do this again?
I think there's a different story out there now, too, because of the recent Newsweek story about homophobia. There's going to be more of that, more of what the straight world is starting to have to rethink us. And there's going to be a lot about that, I think. That's sort of a story that seems to be working its way through the major media right now.
I would like to point out that we had a story on homophobia a year ago.
Well, that's a good thing too, I think. Just that kind of helps Middle America, or you know, the rest of the straight population, to begin accepting, at least, or begin understanding where their hate comes from or where their prejudice comes from.
And also, I think it helps people who are already, straight people who are already there, who feel that, you know, that they're terribly isolated. They have gay and lesbian family members who they love, and everything's fine. But, you know, like, well, I can't really discuss this with the rest of the world.
Well, we've certainly been everywhere this past year, and we have to take a break now. So come back. We'll be right back after these short messages.
Pick up your telephone right now and call the number on your screen. Find out how you can enrich your family values by learning about your gay children.
We had no idea what the gay community was like.
Learn how these parents deal with their fears about attending parents' flag meetings.
One of my biggest fears was that I would see someone that I knew.
Call the telephone number on your screen right now and see how these parents have taken themselves to acceptance and beyond.
Because that parent does not know the positives yet about the gay community.
Here's one time it doesn't matter who your neighbor is. Here's the other. Life's too short. Stop the hate.
Welcome back. My name is Jehan Agrama, and I'm media co-chair for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and you're watching Get Used to It. We've been talking about the media, gays and lesbians, our portrayals and our coverage, and our guests today are Sean Dwyer, who's a development director with Norman Lear's Act 3 Productions, yes. David Ehrenstein, a freelance writer and film critic historian, and Bettina Boxall, who's a Metro reporter for the Los Angeles Times, who covers gay and lesbian issues. We were talking about where we've come, you know, from the past and where we're going. Do you think we've hit a lavender ceiling? Is this saturation of gay and lesbian issues? Are we going to be seeing more of us, or is this it?
I think we've just scratched the surface. I mean, we've taken baby steps. There are a couple of positive portrayals on television, but there are problems. There are problems that need to be forced, probably. The fact that there were 2 pilots last year that featured gay characters, and one, which is the Harvey Fierstein project, didn't get picked up, and another, Monty, was rewritten without the gay daughter. So there are still hurdles to come. I mean, just the fact that I was talking before about a pilot that I had pitched with a gay character. We met with resistance everywhere we pitched it, and they wanted us to change it. They wanted us to make him not gay. And so there still is resistance there, and the whole point is that we have just hit the surface, you know.
Well, what can be done? I mean, an organization like Glaad, which deals with defamation in the media and writes letters and makes phone calls, is that effective, or what can viewers be doing to move this along?
Well, they can write letters to the network, to the production companies, when they see shows that they like. That is something that people can do. But it's funny that, you know, you're talking about sort of running into lots of resistance in television production. I think in film we're also just scratching the surface, but I don't see any limits at the moment. There seems to be an enormous amount of creative work being done by a new generation of people, that aren't hemmed in by any boundaries of how to portray gays and lesbians or what stories to tell or how. And this has led to a lot of very, very exciting, very experimental work. There's a lot of other areas that should be filled in by Hollywood, more quote unquote mainstream filmmaking dealing with gay characters. There's plenty of novels out there that should be adapted to the screen. Some of them are sitting in development hell in various studios around town. But I think you're going to see a gradual moving into this. I think it's an inevitable process with gay and lesbian issues out in the world, that it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore our existence, and if somebody's looking for something new in terms of a plot or character or situation, here we are.
Yeah, I think that's important too, to look at the fact that, especially with the younger generation starting to come forward, a generation where gay and lesbian was not a bad word or a word that was never discussed. I mean, as it becomes part of our culture, then our culture is affected by it. So I think that what you will see in the future may be more chances and more places, because the generation that's coming into power is more tolerant towards it.
But isn't it also true that, I mean, one of the reasons that Glaad formed was that we are in the culture and we're not being shown in the culture. And the only way to do that is to get these TV, even though they're stilted, and maybe a Hollywood movie here and there, and some coverage. And I'm wondering, how do we get towards integration where we are just another character who happens to be gay or lesbian? Or we are in the financial part of the newspaper, not just the Metro or the lifestyle section of the paper.
I think that's still floating around, because just recently there was a low-budget independent film called Go Fish, which had its premiere at the Sundance Festival. Very low-budget little comedy about a group of lesbians, about a group of women who match up to friends of theirs. Samuel Goldwyn picked it up, and they announced very proudly and clearly that they intended to take this movie all over the world. They said that there are lesbians everywhere, something that that we've always known. And they're sitting up and they're realizing that this little comedy is something that could really travel. That there is an audience that is dying for a nice little lesbian comedy, and that fact is going to impact more and more on the kinds of works that are going to be made, especially if you've got a film that costs virtually nothing in Hollywood terms, and that can head straight for profit here on in.
Well, they always talk about the profit, and I guess this is what irks me. I mean, they say, well, will people watch this, or there is no market in terms of the films, or, we really can't have somebody in television because of the ratings, and yet, if you look at the talk show circuit, we're on continuously because people seem to be interested.
Well, there are markets and there are markets, and Hollywood always talks about the highest end of it, which is to say the big mainstream movie made for $40 million is going to open in 5,000 theaters everywhere, is going to have to turn in a profit of, or turn in a box office receipts of, say, $25 million over the weekend, and it's a penny less than the things it did, and it's all, that's only one kind of movie. And so many of the low-budget independent films have been able to go to something approaching actual profit. They do have a commercial viability, and they are reaching audiences, and they will continue to reach other audiences through home video as well.
I think it's important to go for Hollywood, to push them in that direction too, to show them that viewpoint is viable and that people want to see it. I think it's important to get the mainstream films to see that view, or to incorporate characters into that, I mean, it's important to get to Hollywood also, not just independent, because there's always been...
Why Hollywood?
Well, there's always been,
because I know David feels that to stop focusing on Hollywood, let's focus on the independents.
Well, see, I think independent film has always shown sides of life that people, other sides of life, whether it was, I mean, I don't know, I don't have any examples, but, like smaller sections of lifestyles and smaller sections of populations. But an independent film is successful, it makes a couple $1 million. But if you get a character in a major Hollywood film, you have guaranteed millions and millions of people seeing that.
Yeah,
and seeing it on video and seeing it on television after that. And I think that that is where society will be affected more than independent film, unless it hits really wide.
I disagree. I think that you can get a film out there through Hollywood, through absolute, just the pure power of Hollywood. But I don't think that necessarily translates into something that could be far more viable from an independent film, something that's less filtered by Hollywood's attitudes. My only interest in Hollywood really is getting Hollywood to believe in itself. There are tremendous amounts of gays and lesbians in this industry who have programmed themselves to not think of their own existence, to just be silent and go along with the program.
Well, of course, it's true of women. It's true of people of color. I mean, everybody's programmed to think of just profit, and sort of they lose themselves. And
white men.
It's also the fear. It's also the fear of being, pigeonholed. If you bring up gay matters, well, then you're the gay executive.
Well, what are we
or
gonna
if you bring
do?
over black, if your producer wants to push only black issues, you're the black film producer.
Yeah, but if you're the black film producer, you'll never get to be the white film producer. No matter what. So why not deal with reality? It's. I think this is also impacting overall in society, that people are beginning to question this notion of what constitutes the mainstream because they're not in it, and their lives count. They have stories to tell. They have things to do. I mean, it was. Certainly in the world of journalism, this is starting to impact a lot more in terms of stories. That when something is happening, who is it happening to? Mm-hmm. In what community? What sort of a story is this? Is this a story about people at a socioeconomic level, or is it about this particular area in town where there is a concentration of this group, that group, the other? So gay and lesbian stories obviously feed into that.
Do you feel pigeonholed?
No, I don't. And perhaps I'm naive and will be proven wrong. But covering gays is only one of the things that I've done, over a number of years at the LA Times. I'm sure I will not be covering gay issues for the rest of my life. It happens to be my beat right now. I know that I can do other things. I have done other things. They know I can do other things. So. No, I mean, I don't think that I have, been permanently forced, into one role that I will never be able to escape from. I was going to return earlier to talking about mainstreaming, which is sort of an interesting issue with print. And when is it relevant to bring up someone's identity? I mean, we deal with this issue all the time. I mean, obviously, if you're interviewing men and women and quoting them in the newspaper, well, the name is obvious. You have a woman here. You have a man here. But I mean, we have.
Her name is Pat.
Right.
Or Chris.
Or Sean. But I mean, at the Times, we are taught, for instance, not to introduce race gratuitously. I mean, we don't identify someone as being, white or Latino or black just for the hell of it. And I think the same thing, applies to gay. When is it, if I'm interviewing somebody on a subject in which they are not, obviously gay, but they are gay, when is it appropriate and relevant to introduce the fact that they're gay? And I'm sure an organization like Glaad, assuming that the person is not a convict, isn't being arrested for embezzlement, would like, if it's an interesting person, a good role model, you would like the person to be identified, as gay. But if I'm not really talking about the person's personal life, when is it really relevant?
I don't really know that that's true. I mean, I think that what Glaad has always gone for is if you're doing stories and including people of all races and ethnicities, and making a point of showing different couples or different people in similar situations and their reactions, then also include us. But I think we would agree with you that no, you don't need to talk about somebody's sexual orientation just as a point.
Well, I was just reading, it was in the New York Times today, there was a piece in the sports section about Martina Navratilova, and it was talking about she's entering into the twilight of her career. And one of the things that was very interesting in the piece is that it brought up she mentioned the fact that she's in a new relationship with somebody who likes tennis but isn't a big sports nut and terribly involved.
And the name is?
No name. But she said that that's what I like about her. And this was brought in a sort of free and easy way. Of course, it's easy for sports people to talk about Martina now, but I thought it was nice that it wasn't just a sports story in that way, and that, you know, like, as Martina's, you know, leaving tennis and going off to whatever she's going to do, you know, how's your love life is not an invalid question.
Well, it's very funny now. You know, we're seeing the coverage of the Winter Olympics, and when they're interviewing, you know, the pair skaters or this, they delve into their families and where they came from, and then you get to the men's skaters. And, you know, there are no little blurbs about where they came from or their family or friends.
Don't get me started on ice skating.
So it's just another way of, that's a place where it wouldn't be gratuitous because everybody else is doing it. We're doing it for the heterosexuals in terms of trying to show a background.
But how many of those ice skaters would like to delve into the details of their family life? I mean, you know, you've got a resistance on the other side too, where someone, you know, may be fairly open about their sexuality, but it's quite another thing to have it discussed in print, quite another thing to be talking about it, you know.
Those commercial endorsers are going to go straight out the door.
Yeah, well, and of course you're dealing with people whose whole livelihood is based on what they do after the Olympics, on an image, and quite frankly, middle America's not going to take that right now.
Well, I love the cynical turn we've taken.
I mean, it's just...
And it's reality.
It's just not a good business decision, and that's where they have to come from right now because they are not in a position yet.
So what's
like
going to change this? I mean, we've talked about, oh, TV is doing great and independent's doing great and gee, we're getting covered. What's going to change this where it is no longer an issue, where we're not going to have endorsers fleeing? I mean, some people seem to get it and are creating and doing, and some people seem to be on another planet.
I think it's going to come from the people themselves. I think that there's all this talk about actors playing gay roles or being out in Hollywood. I think that, you know, somewhere in this city right now is somebody who's going to be the next big thing and is not going to do the closet, is just not going to do it. And will get through that by dint of his or her talent. And I think the same thing will happen in 40 years with ice skating.
Yeah, I think it's something that's going to take a very long time.
I think Glaad will play a part in helping that too, because they do positive things also. They acknowledge, you know, they go after, you know...
you don't like how we go after. You're looking at me that way.
The going after part, I think that Glaad walks a tightrope. I mean, the point is that commenting or criticizing a lot of gay characters or something in certain situations on TV and film, you're giving a producer reluctance to go there again. And that could be a problem.
You
just
mean
because it's at its infancy.
Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like when black sitcoms started in the early 70s, when they came to flourish. Every time a black sitcom came out, a black group would either attack it or pull it apart, and so there's a certain reluctance of people to go there again, to do that again, to grow from that, because they don't want to deal with the public backlash again. I mean, it's like
there's still a lot of controversy in the black community about
there is. It's still
shows like Martin split the African American community right down the middle.
It's just like Good Times premieres and they attack it because it's just showing blacks as poor victims. The Cosby Show premieres is saying, well, that's totally unreal. Blacks, you know, that's not portraying us the way we are. That's the tightrope that Glaad needs to walk, I believe, just because I think they do a great thing by acknowledging positive stereotypes, positive role models with the Glaad Awards, and I was there last year, and it was a great evening because it really did. It presented good role models and good things in the future, as well as you know, seeing that backlash.
Well, I'd like to turn the tables now in terms of, you know, what is the future for an organization such as Glaad and the kinds of things that they talk about and the manner in which they do it. I mean, I still see gay groups, and the gay community itself, I think, often doesn't, I don't believe, have an appreciation for what journalism really is. I mean, they see things in terms of advocacy, and I think Glaad sees things very much in terms of a positive image, rather than a complex image or an image of quality. I mean, you can have something that's positive. It can be complete crap. It can be, whoops, shouldn't have said that. I don't know if that's an FCC word, we'll find out. It can be, you know, a very simplistic. I mean, ultimately, I think what the goal of everyone should be is you know, the rich complexity of people. And, you know, we don't just have to have, a articulate, wonderful
Yeah,
gay
but we're also
person.
realistic. We're talking about Hollywood, television. We're not talking independent. So when you talk about complex, we don't have great expectations for complexity. I mean, there's some fantastic shows out that have three-dimensional characters. They are few and far between. So I think what we hopefully are striving for is a balance of I don't think we're only going for the positive image. There have been independent pictures that have had, gay characters that are complex and not somebody that you would necessarily like. Whether it's
Swoon.
You'd mentioned there's another film, Savage Nights, that has a character that might not be all that likable with
what
what.
Wish You Were Here. The Gary Oldman.
Oh yeah, We Think the World of You.
We Think the World.
So I don't think it's solely that. I think we would like to see more complex and variety, but we haven't had enough to balance it out, especially from the Hollywood area of television and film.
Also, to come to Glaad's defense on this point, I think one of the things that's interesting is that it sets up a dialogue within the community, which is terribly important. It's very important for Glaad to point out something's going on. You should take a look at this. We think this, but that doesn't mean that everybody should just fall in line. People could like it, not like it, and then this opens up a space for talking about the kinds of images that we're seeing and what we think of them and what we want instead, or whether this or that is adequate.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever pretended. I mean, I suppose sometimes when you make statements, everybody thinks you're speaking for an entire community, and it is difficult, given our community and the diversity of opinion in it. But one thing that we're doing now is really going within the organizations. We've set up our sexual orientation and the workplace trainings to talk about these issues, not from a product point of view, but how is this what's happening in the workplace. We've seen, like at the LA Times, the caucuses growing at studios, networks, television stations. So hopefully that will have some impact, working within instead of just the outside.
That could trickle out into those people who are making those decisions. And
Sean was saying that you thought that the surface was just being scratched. I'm not sure that that's quite true with journalism and print media. I think the coverage is somewhat governed by controversy, and we're certainly going to have controversy around for quite some time, because there is a very committed and steady opposition to gay rights. This year we're going to have a number of anti-gay initiatives probably on ballots in a number of states, so that is going to become the equivalent of the gays in the military issue last year. But without that controversy and coverage of it, the stories are going to recede somewhat. You've seen that already since the gays in the military died down. I mean, things have gotten somewhat quieter, and certainly last year, if there had been no opposition to Clinton's proposal and Sam Nunn had just said, "Oh, that's just wonderful, fine, we'll have gays in the military," there wouldn't have been nearly the volume of stories and the volume of TV shows on the subject would have been minuscule in comparison. I do sometimes wonder what the level of public interest will remain at. And sometimes I wonder, does anybody read my stories except for gay people and the religious right? How many of the how many members of the public have a sustained interest in this topic? And I go back and forth, and sometimes I think that nobody's reading me, but gay activists and conservative activists, and then I think, well, no, I mean, it really is a subject that is very interesting in a number of ways and touches on a number of different social aspects and holds long-term public interest. But I mean, news moves in waves, and coverage moves in waves, and we've had a certain amount of gee whiz coverage in the past year, and the issue has very much been legitimized as a news topic, and I don't think there will ever be a turning back from that. I mean, that niche has been carved, but I think you might have some editors, rolling their eyes and saying, we've really, done this, and what's the new angle?
Because we need an angle. Oh, you mentioned the initiatives that are coming up. If those aren't going to be in major areas, do you think, I mean, what kind of coverage can we expect?
I think, I mean, look at the coverage that the Oregon Initiative got. I mean, that got a great deal of national coverage, and it was, you know, it was one state, and you know, along with Colorado, which didn't get so much coverage. But I think, you know, what happened in those two states, you know, very much cleared the way for national coverage, and particularly this year when it looks like there will exist in a number of different states and in variations. So I think that it'll generate, you know, intense coverage within those states, and will also garner a fair amount of national coverage, because it very much is, you know, it's a trend, and with fairly far-reaching implications.
And in the national coverage, I think they will hook into the fact that different initiatives are being dealt with in different places, and are getting different reactions depending on how quickly the various gay groups involved are moving to quash these things, what's being done, what's being said, the kinds of ways that the right is trying to tailor its bigotry to slip through. And I think the overall impact of getting people to realize that being able to hold a job, have an apartment somewhere, and mind your own business is not a special right. There's nothing special about that. It's just very ordinary, and it doesn't mean that, you know, by putting this in, you will immediately be able to, you know, adopt somebody else's child or something, you know, and you know, or hang from the ceiling. I don't know what insane fantasies they create about the power that we don't have. They don't want us to have, you know.
One thing that'll be interesting to see how sophisticated the coverage is. I mean, it was interesting to compare the coverage in Oregon, within the state of Oregon, with the coverage within the state of Colorado. It was vastly different, partly because the Oregon initiative was so much stronger than the Colorado one. But in Colorado, the coverage was really pretty superficial, you know, special rights versus equal rights, whereas in Oregon, I mean, there was really an examination of advertisements and statements, and I mean, it was really treated as a serious political campaign, and was dissected in a very thorough manner. I mean, a lot of gay coverage now by broadcast and print is just a repetition of rhetoric by each side. You know, he said, she said, the gays say this, the anti-gays, you know, say this, and it just cancels each other out, you know, without much of an attempt to go beyond and to examine the material and not just repeat the rhetoric. And it would be nice if the coverage could become more sophisticated and more complex. Whether it will, I have no idea.
Well, in talking about, you know, you had said scratching the surface, I think that's what we're all hoping for, in terms of not just more, but the complexity, and really delving into this issue, because until it is, we have to deal with so much misinformation as it is, that until we clear that away and actually get to the root of these issues, public opinion won't change, because it will be just the same things said over and over. Time has flown, and I really want to thank you again for being here. Sean Dwyer,
thank you.
David Ehrenstein, and Bettina Boxall. You've been watching Get Used to It. We've been talking about gays and lesbians and the media and our coverage. And if you want more information about how you can make a difference and get involved in changing public opinion through the media or affecting change in the media, there'll be a number at the end, and you can call Glaad, and we would be happy to work with you. Thank you for watching Get Used to It. We will see you again next time. And thanks to Sheila James Kuehl for allowing me to guest host. I'm Jehan Agrama, and see you later.